Imagine a country deciding pretty much from scratch to build its own airplanes, in a world completely dominated by massive Western aerospace companies. Well, that's the wild story of Embraer, Brazil's aerospace champion. It's an incredible tale of national ambition, of coming this close to total collapse, and of a brilliant strategy that turned an impossible dream into a global force. All right, let's get into it. And this quote, it really nails the whole spirit of the thing. It captures just how audacious this idea was. I mean, the entire industry was basically saying, no way. But for Embraer, this wasn't just some challenge. It was their whole reason to exist, to prove that the impossible was, in fact, possible. So, that's the big question, right? How on earth did they actually pull this off? Well, as we're about to see, this was no accident. It was a whole series of calculated risks, some really painful changes, and honestly, a stroke of strategic genius that would end up changing the entire game. Okay, so let's rewind. Our story starts back in the late 1960s. Brazil's under military rule and it's pushing hard to industrialize. But think about it. For a country this enormous, with so much undeveloped land and tough terrain, having to rely on foreign planes was a massive strategic problem. And so Embraer was basically born out of pure necessity. On August 19, 1969, it was officially created as a state-owned company with a super clear mission: build planes for Brazil by Brazilians. This was way more than just a business. It was about national pride and sovereignty. The company kind of hit the ground running. They focused on what they knew they could sell: planes for the government. But here's the thing. That early success was hiding a deep structural flaw that would pretty soon threaten to bring the whole dream crashing right back down to earth. So let's just walk through these early years. You can see they delivered their first plane, the rugged little Bandeirante, back in '73. Through the '70s and '80s, they built up some serious know-how with military contracts and other successful planes like the Brasilia. But, and this is the key part, look at the end of that timeline. That success just couldn't last. By the early 90s, the financial weight of being a state-run company was just too much, and Embraer found itself right on the edge of going bankrupt. And this brings us to what is, without a doubt, the single most important moment in Embraer's entire history. Facing total collapse, the company went through a radical transformation. And we're not just talking a change in who owned it, this was a fundamental change in its DNA. And wow, this slide just lays it all out, doesn't it? Before 1994, under state control, it was all financial strain and being dependent on the government. Then, after privatization, you get this huge injection of private money, and the entire focus shifts. The new mission, efficiency, and most importantly, selling planes to the entire world. And that new freedom, that new cash, it paid off almost immediately. Just 1 year after privatization, Embraer launches the ERJ-145, a 50-seat regional jet. It was efficient, it was reliable, and you know what? International airlines absolutely loved it. This was the plane that officially put Embraer on the global map. Now, with all this new success, Embraer could have gotten cocky. They could have tried to take on Boeing and Airbus directly. But here's where they got really, really smart. They came up with a brilliant strategy that was all about one core idea. Don't fight a battle you can't win. Instead, create a whole new one. And this right here is the secret sauce. They carved out a niche for themselves. They focused like a laser on the market for planes with under 150 seats. For giants like Boeing and Airbus, that market was just, too small to be worth their time. But for Embraer, it was the perfect playground to absolutely dominate with smaller, super efficient jets. And how well did that strategy actually work? Well, this chart says it all, doesn't it? For 2025, Embraer's new E2 jets were outselling their closest competitor from Airbus by almost 4-1. I mean, that's not just winning, that's pure dominance in your chosen field. But their success wasn't just a one-trick pony. As you can see here, they built a really solid business model around that niche. First off, they diversified into commercial, executive, and defense planes, so a bad year in one area wouldn't sink the ship. Second, they got really integrated into the huge US market. It became their biggest customer. Third, they just never stopped innovating, pouring a big chunk of their money back into R&D. And finally, they proved how tough they were by navigating these huge trade disputes and actually coming out stronger. All of this success built a company that was, well, tough as nails. And that toughness was about to be tested like never before.
Just when it looked like Embraer was about to join the absolute top tier, it faced its biggest crisis since the 90s.
So picture this. In 2018, they announced this massive, landmark deal, a joint venture with Boeing. This was supposed to be their crowning achievement. But then, in 2020, with Boeing dealing with its own 737 MAX crisis and the pandemic causing chaos, the deal was suddenly called off.
And the fallout? Whoa, it was absolutely brutal. Basically left at the altar, Embraer posted a staggering net loss of $731 million. For a lot of companies, a hit like that would have been game over. But not for Embraer. In what has to be one of the great comeback stories, they regrouped, they refocused, and by 2024, they weren't just profitable again, they were posting their highest revenue ever at $6.4 billion. Just an incredible display of resilience. And get this, they're not just back on their feet, they are sprinting into the future. They are right at the forefront of sustainable aviation, working on new hybrid and hydrogen planes. Their pioneering was called urban air mobility. Yeah, think flying taxis, with their cool subsidiary, Eve. And they're not just selling to the world anymore, they're building these powerful new partnerships in places like India.
So, when you step back and look at this whole crazy journey of massive highs and devastating lows, what's the real legacy here? What can we all learn from this impossible Brazilian dream that came true? At the end of the day, you can kind of boil it all down to this four-part blueprint. First, a laser focus on a niche market you can own. Second, diversifying your business so you're resilient. Third, a relentless, never-ending commitment to innovation. And finally, that critical, all-important pivot from a state-run project to a nimble, global company. Which leaves us with one last really fascinating question to think about. Embraer proved that an emerging economy could build a world-class, high-tech champion. So could their incredible journey from a government pet project to a global powerhouse be the ultimate blueprint for other nations looking to conquer their own impossible dreams,